Welcome everyone to tonight's webinar, Gratitude is a Way of Life, a conversation with Kathleen Dean Moore, whom I will introduce more fully in a moment. My name is Jessie Rack. I am the program director at the Natural History Institute here in Prescott, Arizona. So I first want to say a couple of words about the Institute for those of you not familiar with our work. The Institute is a mission-based independent nonprofit organization based here in Prescott, Arizona. Our mission is to provide leadership and resources for a revitalized practice of natural history, integrating arts, science, and the humanities. We believe that everyone can participate in the practice of natural history, and that by so doing, they can learn to care for the world and in return reap the mental and physical health benefits of nature. I want to quickly bring your attention to a couple of resources the Natural History Institute has to offer. One is our website, naturalhistoryinstitute.org, which has all sorts of information on there, including about upcoming programs. My colleague Jenny has dropped it in the chat there. If you'd like to just click through and save it, you can do that now. So an upcoming thing folks attending today might be interested in, next Wednesday, April 19th at 3:30 p.m. Eastern time, that's 12:30 p.m. Arizona time and Pacific, we have another webinar. It's the final installment of our Science and Conversation webinar series, and it's called Saving Nature in the Heat Age, a Natural History of Climate Change, in which I'll be talking with Dr. Mark Urban from the University of Connecticut about how natural history information might help us make better predictions about the fate of species in the face of climate change. So that'll be really good, I hope. Tonight's webinar is part of our new series called Healing the Earth, Healing Ourselves, in which these series of programs ask, how can we heal ourselves in nature? And how can we, in all gratitude, work to heal the earth? So it's a series of talks and workshops through which we're exploring how to heal and how to give back. And I'm delighted that Kathleen's here to kick it all off. Couple of things quickly about how we're going to work the logistics of the program here tonight in terms of Zoom protocols. So people have been saying hi in the chat, and I love that. Just so you know, we'll be turning that off momentarily, just because it's a bit distracting if people are chatting back and forth while we're talking. But in its place, we'll be using the Q&A function, which you can see it at the bottom of your screen. It looks like two little chat bubbles, like cartoon speech bubbles. So it'll be on throughout the whole program. If at any point you have a question for Kathleen or a comment you'd like to make, go ahead and plop that in there, and we'll save the last few minutes of our conversation to go visit those questions and address a couple. Finally, this program will be recorded and available on the Natural History Institute's YouTube channel. So it'll be available immediately after the program, but tomorrow in an edited form where I trim off the beginning. The link is in the chat as well. Check that out. Feel free to share if you're so inspired. So now, it is my great pleasure and honor to introduce our guest here tonight, Dr. Kathleen Dean Moore. So Kathleen is the prize-winning author of more than a dozen books about our cultural and moral relation to the world. She's a moral philosopher by training with a PhD from the University of Colorado. She was formerly Distinguished Professor of Philosophy at Oregon State University, but she left academia to focus on writing and speaking about the moral urgency of action on the climate and extinction crisis. While at OSU, she co-founded and for many years directed the Spring Creek Project for Ideas, Nature, and the Written Word, and co-founded the Long-Term Ecological Reflections Program at the H.J. Andrews Experimental Forest. Kathleen's most recent books, two of which we'll be focusing on tonight, include Earth's Wild Music, I can do a show and tell, Earth's Wild Music, Celebrating and Defending the Songs of the Natural World, Bearing Witness, The Human Rights Case Against Fracking and Climate Change, and now the illustrated Take Heart, Encouragement for Earth's Weary Lovers. She often works with music and film, having written the scripts for a number of short films produced by the Spring Creek Project. And on a personal note, Kathleen, I discovered your work about a decade ago when I was in graduate school. So my dad passed away, and I was looking to nature and to books for support and healing. And I came across this book, Wild Comfort, The Solace of Nature. And I kind of just can't describe the beauty and consolation that your words have brought me. So in the spirit of tonight's conversation, I'm grateful for the opportunity to say thank you to you for that. Thank you for your words. Thank you for being there for me, even though you didn't know me. And thank you so much for joining us tonight.
It's really a pleasure, Jessie, and it's nice to meet you and get to work with you, and how wonderful to be among friends. and Sarah and Susan and my buddies. I just wish we were all together in the same room in Prescott. Actually, that'd probably be better weather than we have up there.
It's pretty lovely weather, yeah. So let me kick this off. I have a few questions for you, kind of to let you go. So the series that I mentioned, our Healing the Earth, Healing Ourselves series, is framed around the concept of reciprocal healing. And this is the idea that nature can help heal us just as we can help nature to heal. And more than that, just the act of working to restore the beauty and thriving of nature, that in helping nature, we also can restore the well-being of our own bodies and spirits. How do you see your work in conversation with this idea?
Yeah, okay. Thank you. I love the question. You know, it was only last fall that I was in British Columbia, and I was blundered into this abandoned campsite over by a stream in the deep forest. And that stream was just full of splashing salmon, and it was full of grizzly bears. But right there at the edge of the stream, there was a circle around this giant hemlock tree. The bear had organized the spawned out salmon head to tail. And there they were in this perfect circle. Their skin was shivering with maggots, and they looked like they were dancing. And it was a perfect metaphor. In fact, it was a cliche as a metaphor about the cycles of giving and receiving and giving in turn that make the world go round. So the bears eat the salmon, and they give their nutrients to the trees, and the trees receive the nutrients, and they grow tall to give their shade to the stream. And the streams receive the gift of the shade and use it to cool their water for the black flies. The black flies give their nutrients to the salmon, and the salmon give their nutrients to the bears. You know how it goes in these interconnected, interdependent, generative, cyclic streams of energy from the past to the future. You might think of it as a kind of gift ecology, or the ecology of gifts. And of course, that it's not just bears and salmon, although that's what we immediately think of. The whole world goes around like that, right? In every process, in every system, there's these intersecting circles of giving, receiving, giving in turn. And without this reciprocity of gifts, the world would come to a halt. It would unreel, the spirals would unreel, and they would just lie there in broken coils. And so you might say, well, what about us? Do we belong in these cycles of giving? And yeah, we also are part of this global ontology of giving and receiving these gifts that come to us, undeserved, for sure, unearned, but generous and essential. So the whole point that I want to start with is that the moral implications for how we ought to live our lives are staggering. If we receive these gifts, then we enter into this community of mutual sharing. It's beautiful, the mutual caring. And it's a community that assigns us role responsibilities that are both material on the one hand, we give our cells and our nutrients to the soil, and moral. We give our duties to the world. So we have a responsibility to give thanks. We have a responsibility to give our gifts as we receive them in these reciprocal cycles of nourishing and healing. So to your point, a long way around, to your point, Jesse, yeah, people seek out the gifts of the forest, the healing gifts of the forest. And I think immediately of forest bathing, for example, where you go and you soak up the forest's gifts of calm and fresh air. And in turn, you assume the responsibility for the well-being of the forest. You give as you take as you give. And so we've had this long history of thinking about these cycles of destruction, where one kind of destruction leads inexorably to another. But hooray for the Natural History Institute, and hooray for you, and how uplifting it is to clearly recognize that there is a reciprocity too in healing.
Yeah, and I love that. And I think the image you described with the bear and the salmon was the header image, right? That you gave me for the event.
To see that. It has occurred to me more recently that maybe the bears didn't put them there, that maybe people found us and put them there. But then I thought, those would be very, very brave people to be wandering around in that forest by that stream, carrying the carcasses of salmon.
Messing with a salmon, with the bear salmon. Yeah.
At any rate, it was extraordinary. And I'm glad that you put the picture up.
Yeah, no, it's a wonderful anecdote and a wonderful story to kind of frame the idea of reciprocal healing as we're interpreting it. So thank you for that. And I guess also, since you decided, or you suggested, that we call this conversation Gratitude is a Way of Life. And so I guess, stemming from your last answer, is gratitude itself a kind of healing?
I think so. You know, there's a bench at the top of a hill, Bald Hill, that's over near my house, and it has a plaque. The plaque says, "The season of rain is coming. Hold out your hand." That's how I want to live my life. To know that this earth is generous. I mean, generous is a wonderful word from the same roots as generate and Genesis, a beginning, a sudden outpouring, and there was light and there was rain. The earth is generous. And then to hold out my hand and receive those gifts. And then to feel the peace and the joy of gratitude. The young woman who wrote those words was soon after killed in an automobile accident. And I often think about her and think about how she opened her hand. The season of rain is coming. Hold out your hand. Meister Eckhart. I've got all these quotes stuck all around here, Jesse. So this one is Meister Eckhart, and he says, "Gratitude turns what we have into enough and more. It turns denial into acceptance, chaos into order, confusion into clarity. It makes sense of our past, brings peace for today, and creates a vision for tomorrow." And honestly, that sounds like healing to me.
It sure does. Yeah.
And then there's this poet, Hafiz. You see me, I'm bringing out all my treasures for you. Okay, here's what he says. It's a poem. "Even after all this time, the sun never says to the earth, 'You owe me.' Look what happens with a love like that. It lights the whole sky." So yes, I do think that gratitude is a kind of healing. And if we can find gratitude in our hearts, we will also find a kind of wholeness, which is healing, which is health.
Yeah. Like, I asked that question, but I don't think I'd fully thought it out in my head. But the more I think about it, when I'm feeling gratitude, when I'm walking the forest and like trying to feel gratitude, it feels good, right? It doesn't feel like a forced thing. I feel better. So I don't know. Personal anecdote, Jesse Rack, 2023. But
right.
Yeah. So, okay. So gratitude can be a kind of healing. And so much of your work is about environmental activism and using your background in moral philosophy to move people to action. And so maybe how can gratitude move us to action, and how can it do that?
Yeah, it would seem to me that gratitude without action would be empty. It would be a kind of a fraud, because the whole notion of gratitude is entering into this community of reciprocity. It calls us to give the gifts forward. It calls us to create these circles of thanksgiving and to create communities of support that benefit everybody mutually. And that is how we honor the debt that we incur for all that we have been given. So in gratitude for the nurturing food, we replenish the soil. In gratitude for birdsong, we protect the forests. I mean, these are actions. In gratitude for a child's love, we love the child. And in gratitude for life, we make ourselves as much as we can worthy of bearing that great gift. And that's how, by these great circle dances, we assure that flourishing can continue. In this, my thinking has been absolutely inspired by this Robin Wall Kimmerer, this wonderful, wise, and dear friend Potawatomi elder, who writes about what she calls the moral covenant of responsibility. She says, "We're bound by a covenant of reciprocity, a pact of mutual responsibility to sustain those who sustained us. Note covenant, that is a strong word. Plant breath for animal breath, winter and summer, predator and prey, grass and fire, night and day, living and dying. Water knows this. Clouds know this. Soil and rocks know they are dancing in a continuous giveaway of making, unmaking, and making again the earth. We live in a moral landscape. Earth is a gift that we must pass on just as it comes to us. Beautifully said, I think. Beautifully conceived, and I think beautifully said. And then you, Jessie, reminded me of the article that Terry Tempest Williams wrote in the New York Times last week.
The end of March, yeah.
Something like that, about the terrible parching of the Great Salt Lake, the terrible death of the birds, hundreds of birds.
Mm-hmm.
And what she says is that we have to take our gratitude and we have to take our grief and we have to turn it into action. And her words are, we must mobilize our love for the earth. Mobilize, make mobile, put into motion our love.
Mm-hmm.
But what I've said about this, I think I've said better. I mean, I told Jessie, everybody, I told Jessie, I'm not a speaker, I'm a writer. And so let me refer to what I've written. And would you play this excerpt from the Extinction Variations that talks about what it means when gratitude and love lead us to action?
Yep. So I'll share that now. The quality probably won't be as good on your home screens as it is on YouTube, but we can also drop the link in the chat. It's there now if you'd like to check it out. But here we go. Okay.
In the spring, when our granddaughter was born, I brought her to the pond so she could feel the comfort I had known there for so many years. Killdeer waddled in the mud by the shore, but not so many as before. Ahead of the coming heat, butterflies fed in the mud between the cracks, unrolling their tongues to touch salty soil. I held my granddaughter in my arms and sang to her then, an old lullaby that made her soften like wax in a flame, molding her little body to my bones. She fell asleep in my arms, unafraid. I will tell you, I was so afraid. Poets warned us, writing of the heartbreaking beauty that will remain when there is no heart to break for it. But what if it's worse than that? What if it's the heartbroken children who remain in a world without beauty? How will they find solace in a world without wild music? How will they thrive without green hills edged with oaks? How will they forgive us for letting frog song slip away? It isn't enough to love a child and wish her well. It isn't enough to open my heart to a bird-graced morning. Can I claim to love a child if I don't use all the power of my beating heart to preserve a world that nourishes children's joy? Loving is not a kind of la-di-da. Loving is a sacred trust. To love is to affirm the absolute worth of what you love and to pledge your life to its thriving, to protect it fiercely and faithfully for all time. Ring the Angelus for the salmon and the swallows. Ring the bells for frogs floating in bent reeds. Ring the bells for all of us who did not save the songs. Mother of God, ring the bells for every sacred emptiness. Let them echo in the silence at the end of the day. Forgiveness is too much to ask. I would pray for only this, that our granddaughter would hear again the little lick of music, that grace note toward the end of a meadowlark's song. Meadowlarks. There were meadowlarks. They sang like angels in the morning.
That's Rachmaninoff, variations on a theme of Corelli, performed by my dear, dear friend, the concert pianist Rochelle McCabe. And it's part of a hour-long film that we call the Extinction Variations. And you can find that on YouTube if you'd like to see the whole thing.
Thank you. Oh, your words give me, but then paired with that music, I was like, oh, I have to do this before we can. Oh, it's so beautiful. And so much of your recent work, and indeed the theme of this book, Earth's Wild Music, is about your words paired with music, music performance in that example. So I don't know if I mentioned this. I actually have, before I was a biologist, I actually have a degree in music where I studied vocal performance. So there's, I don't know if it's different parts of my brain or different parts of my soul are just resonating with the words and the music. And I don't know, I guess I'd love to know where this came from, why this pairing of music and words.
Vocal performance, Jessie.
Yes.
You're a singer, like a bird.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's a terrible thing for a writer to admit, it's a terrible thing for a person who's a word worker, a person who makes a living by pulling words out of the air and lining them up in a straight line. But it's true that sometimes words are not enough. And sometimes words fail us. And that's when I turn to music. I think that my work, I think, is to open people's hearts without breaking them. And how to do that? I just agonize over that question. Do I write essays that ask the mind to speak very sternly to the heart? That's the philosopher and logician in me. Or do I put the heart in charge of the mind? I mean, it has to be both ways. There has to be this conversation between the two, right? And all at the same time. So we need the heart and the mind. And the only thing I know that transcends the separation between the heart and the mind is music. You ask the scientists, they have figured this out. When music flows into the brain, all the parts of the brain light up. It's like the electrodes dance and dazzle like Las Vegas. And there is no one place in the brain, especially for music, the way there's a special place for smell or sight. Music floods through the brain and lights up all the places where we feel and analyze and fear and love and perceive and remember and hope, all those places. The music has the strength of a river in flood. So when words start to falter, when words don't have the strength to carry their load, then that's when I ask music to help carry them. And Jessie, it's such a gift. Music is such a gift. When I have a tuba player who plays in the bright reflectivity of his bathroom behind one of my pieces, and there's a bassoonist who's playing while I'm two of the work that I've done about having glaciers, and of course Rochelle McCabe. And so I've created 22 of these. I call them tiny concerts because they're only three minutes long, and each one is an excerpt from Earth's Wild Music, and each one is accompanied by, carried by musical performance. They are on YouTube too. You can just sign up or just Google, just put in the search bar, animal interludes. Yeah.
They're also on the Spring Creek Project page, right? They have the whole page where, so I've watched quite a few as well. So that's wonderful. I love your description of the heart and the mind and how to address both or together. When I was trying to think of how to introduce you and introduce my connection with your work, I was getting in this terrible metaphor land of like it feels like I'm getting like a comforting hug, but then sometimes it's like a firm slap to the face, like a comforting hug, and then I'll like wake up. Yeah, so which you said it more lovely as always. but that's kind of, I like that music is kind of the connector and is reaching that emotional center and firing up the brain in all the ways that can allow us to listen. Hopefully.
It's one of the occupational hazards, I'd say, of being a philosopher and a writer. I get up and come to my desk in the morning and I say, okay, what's it going to be? Is it going to be mind or is it going to be heart? And keep them in conversation. It's what makes the work so challenging and fun.
Yeah. And so thinking again to that essay, which is that one is, I was reading it's the Meadowlark song.
Yeah,
right.
The call of the call to forgiveness at the end of the day. That's what it's called.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So in that piece, and I was rereading the piece in Earth's Wild Music as well, and there's so much both regret and redemption in that essay. I tried listening to that clip several times today so I would not choke up when we played it live, but I still did. So it just really gets to me. But so regret, redemption, so many of the words in conversation about environmental action start with the prefix re, right? So I'm hearing myself say it with restoration, reciprocity, reconnection, even reciprocal, right? So what does this reveal about the times we live in?
Yeah, it's striking, isn't it? How many of our conversations about this uncertain future are about the possibility of a redo. Can we get a redo? We're looking for restoration in every part of our lives. And as Robin reminds us, restoration is restoration. We're looking for new stories that answer the basic questions. What is the earth? What's a human being? How then shall I live? We need new stories to answer those questions in a more healing and redemptive way. And then regret. Oh, have you looked up regret? Of course, again, and gret, which is this old word that means bewail the dead. Regret, to again bewail the dead. And it's no wonder that we have so many regrets, that we spend so much time bewailing the dead, because we have made so many mistakes. And then we've hung on to them like a dog. And by now, the mistakes that we've made are incised into the land so that tangles of highways and the tar sand scars and the empty rivers are all visible, clearly visible from outer space. Yeah, I can imagine a space traveler from a distance coming upon this glistening blue and green planet and getting up a little bit closer and saying, God, what a mess. But it's going to take moral imagination on a scale we've never seen before to turn this around. And listen to me, turn this around, go back, go for the redo. There are all these words and all this yearning about going back to go and getting it right this time. As if there is so much yearning in those words. When I was a teenager, I would sing that hymn. Do you know it? Have you sung it? It's turn back, O man, forswear thy foolish ways. Old now is earth, and none may count her days. Here I am, 13 years old, and crying into the hymnal with that same sort of yearning to take it all back and have another chance, another chance. So the existential question is whether the earth is going to give us a second chance. Maybe a last chance. There is some reason to think so. All the sprouts after a wildfire, right? We've all seen this, all the ways that life urgency insists on going on, insists on continuing, the baby frogs, all that urgency of ongoing life. So maybe there is a chance for some redemption, which would be an act of grace on the part of the earth because it comes undeserved, unearned. But I don't think that it's going to be a going back. I think that what we have to do is go forward in new ways. So I want to change all these words, not redemption, predemption, not restoration, restoration. So we do this looking forward and imagining a new way of living. And honestly, I'm sort of optimistic about this because I think we live in this extraordinary time that I'm calling the Great Convergence. The Great Convergence, when all the wisdom traditions of the world are suddenly coming together in agreement on a new story. Indigenous thought and ecological science and ancient, oftentimes Asian religions, evolutionary thought, all of these are telling us the same story. Finally, it's an old story and it's a new story about this interrelated, interdependent, fragile, and very beautiful world that we're blessed to be a part of. That's a kind of restoration that is really picking up a head of steam. Certainly we need a new story. So that's something we can be grateful for.
Yeah, I love how you're thinking about that. It sounds, and I think you write in one of the essays somewhere, just how, it's like a river. It just keeps going forward. We can't ever go back. We can't ever redo the same thing, but maybe there's something new up ahead. And that's.
Yes. And even the earth is moving forward. They're helping, they're helping the aspens climb up the trees. They're helping trees leap toward the north. They're sending salmon into these new streams that are being formed at the base of the glaciers. The earth is looking for a new story too, a new way of being.
Yeah. To quote Jurassic Park, life finds a way. That's a quote I bet you didn't have on your desk.
May it be so, Jessie, may it be so.
I hope so. So stepping, I guess, back or continuing with our thoughts on gratitude, what is the relationship between gratitude and joy and love? I know we've discussed how gratitude can heal, but what about these three kind of big concepts? How do they relate?
Okay. The relationship.
Just a tiny question for you now.
Relationship between gratitude and joy and love. Okay, well, I love the way Mary Oliver just mashes them all together.
Oh my gosh, Mary. Oh.
In Messenger, right? Let me give you some of it. I'll leave some of it out because it's rather long to read, but my work is loving the world. Here the sunflowers, there the hummingbird, here the clam deep in the speckled sand. Are my boots old? Is my coat torn? Am I no longer young and still half perfect? Let me keep my mind on what matters, which is my work, which is mostly standing still and learning to be astonished, which is mostly rejoicing, which is gratitude, to be given a heart and a mind and these body clothes and a mouth with which to give shouts of joy. Whoa, that's right. She gets all 5 of them there in sentences and just pushes them in all together. Love, astonishment, rejoicing, gratitude, joy. Well, no self-respecting philosopher would let that go. You can't.
Here it comes.
You can't just mush things together like that. You have to find some way to sort them out. But honestly, she nailed it, didn't she?
She did.
Because they do come together. But we could try to sort them out just a tiny bit and go back into it again. And so we begin with love, this wild, reeling world. And that leads us to pay attention to it. We love it. And so we pay attention to it and we study it the way we study every dip and bulge in your lover's body. And the natural world is so marvelous and so unexpected and so unimaginable that who could not, when they pay attention, be astonished. Astonished from that word, that Latin word tonus, which means thunder, to be struck as if by lightning, when the world reveals itself suddenly in a flash that stuns us and knocks us to the ground. Astonishment, which leads us to rejoicing, which leads us to joy, feeling joy just to be part of this world. What a gift it is to be part of this world. And so we come to gratitude and shouts of joy. Let me catch my breath. Did we do it? Good idea.
We did.
I've been thinking a lot, though, about whether it's possible for the heart to hold sorrow and gratitude at the same time. I'm just not sure.
Yeah.
I know that gratitude can lift you out of sadness. And I think that's why we have eulogies at funerals. That's why we have praise songs. What a gift he was to us. And the gratitude for his life then lifts us out of sadness. What a gift he was to us. But I'm not sure. But I think that every moment that you're smiling to see the wind on the water or a dog in the sun, you're not rehearsing your misfortunes.
Yeah.
And then maybe sorrow is nothing more than the absence of gratitude. I think about that and I just don't know. Maybe sorrow is a hole you can fill up with gratitude. I don't know. And I think that sometimes it's okay not to know.
Yeah, I've been trying to reflect as I've been kind of rereading a lot of your recent work and in chatting with you the other day to prepare for this, just thinking about gratitude and grief and trying to reflect in myself if I've ever felt these things at the same time. And I don't think I was aware enough in the moment, but I feel like it's possible. And so where it feels possible to me is this idea of anticipatory grief, which is kind of a recent coinage of a word where you're like grieving something in anticipation of losing it. And I think so much of your recent work kind of touches on that. So I don't know, is there anything you can kind of say more about gratitude and grief together, or?
I've thought a lot about grief, and I do want to talk about anticipatory grief because I think that's huge. Who hasn't thought a lot about grief because we live in a time of great loss? But maybe, Jesse, rather than kind of flounder around with that, I could read you what I've written.
I'd love that. Yeah.
So this is a shorthand form of when grief comes knocking, open the door. It's from Take Heart, Encouragement for Earth's Weary Lovers. Okay, about 3 minutes.
Go for it.
If you love anything finite on this earth, there will be nights when grief knocks at your door. When a lively marsh dies under an asphalt parking lot. When a dam fails and fracking waste spills into the water supply. When yet one more child, dulled by lead poisoning, gives up on life. When a cormorant lands on a deadly lake of oil. When the robin doesn't come to sing. Then comes the sharp knock in the night. Confused, you crack open the door. The moon lights the front walk. Is anyone there? You might quite reasonably slam the door on grief, telling the children, go back to sleep. There's no one there. But if you crack open the door again to make sure it's gone, grief will still be waiting for you on the doormat, shoulders slumped, eyes averted. Invite it in then and close the door softly behind it. I expected you, old friend. Come in. Sit close and rest your head on grief's shoulder. Grief has grown wise and strong during life's long lease on earth. It knows what to do. Grief will sit beside you on the edge of the bed and support your weight as you lean against it. It will put its arms around you if you start to shake and hum as tunelessly as a mother bear. Great grief comes only to those who care greatly. If you had no love, you would have no grief. If you cared not even a little about the marsh, the stream, the cormorant, the bewildered child, you would pass the night unaware and snoring. Grief is a measure of the magnitude of the loss you feel. It's an affirmation of the meaning of ongoing life, a declaration of never-ending love, a ceremony of honoring, a howling yes. Be grateful for grief and understand why it is a necessary gift. These are the three great truths that grief teaches. That you love the reeling world, that it is worthy of your love, and that your love requires you to act in its defense. But now, if despair should knock on your door, double lock the latch, turn out the porch light, and pretend you are not at home. You will be able to recognize despair, while grief is a measure of the magnificence of meaning. Despair denies all meaning and repudiates the possibility that anything is worthy of love. The anticipation of grief calls you to action to defend what you love. But despair, with a sullen wink, relieves you of all responsibility. There is nothing worth putting yourself out for, despair says. Nothing is worth caring about. If you peek through the blinds, you may see despair pacing your front walk, casting a long shadow on the moonlight, smoking a cigarette and scowling. Let it pace there until the soles of its shoes wear away and its blisters burst. Let it frown until its face falls off. Let it wait forever. You have better things to do with your life. Slip out the back door and go on with your work of loving the world.
I love that piece.
Anticipatory grief,
Mm.
as you brought up. Let me go there. I think that's a really big deal. A big deal. Because, good Lord, in the last 50 years, in our lifetimes on our watch, our cruel and extractive lives have wiped out 60% of the mammals on the planet. 30% of North American songbirds are gone. Half the grassland birds are gone. Almost 80% of the migrating shorebirds are gone. Every time one of those birds dies, its song dies in its throat. If nothing changes fast, I'm going to write my last nature essay in a world that is half as beautiful and song-graced as the world where I began to write. We better anticipate these losses. We better grieve. I'm sorry to say this, somebody has to say it. Respectable scientists warn that we may have already crossed too many thresholds. We may already have set in motion too many feedback loops. We may have cut too many arteries, waited too long to staunch the brutal extractions. Earth will always continue to exist until it's swallowed by the sun. I believe that as long as the earth exists, life will live on earth. But the life we know, the life we love, the piney forests and those wild whales, they may be bleeding out. If this is the context we live in, then the duties to defend the earth's life-supporting systems, these gifts, that duty to act is unconditional and universal. It's got to be everybody.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm trying to love that. And it's so hard to kind of balance on that knife edge between grief and not tip into despair too, is kind of what I'm thinking about. Like when you're reading those statistics, I'm just like, I'm wavering, you know, but when despair for the world grows in me, right, Wendell Berry, I come into the peace of the wild things. And so I think this is kind of how I ride the line of just like, I find the peace again, and I remember what it's for, and I remember what I'm grateful for. And I think that's what you're also saying.
Yeah, you find that peace when you go down to the marsh.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's right. But I don't think we should be afraid of a terrible grief, because it makes sense that our grief would be a measure of our love.
Mm-hmm.
And if we have a terrible grief, then that's because we have this tremendous, overwhelming love. And that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The world merits our grief.
Yeah. I have a couple more questions for you. I wanted to quickly remind folks watching the webinar that if you have questions for Kathleen, we'll save some time at the end to get to those. Feel free and drop them in the Q&A. And then I think I have like 2 more questions for you, and then we'll see what awaits us in the Q&A. So grief and joy and gratitude. how do you see those all fitting within the practice of natural history? Since that's our whole thing.
Yeah,
Bringing it back around.
we should stop to celebrate the Natural History Institute and the people who carry its work for us. It's so important. And, the way I see it, natural history is what I would call applied attentiveness, right? Natural history is paying attention. Attention, literally toward tension, stretching. So paying attention is moving towards, stretching towards, it's leaning in, it's leaning close with your good ear and listening, birdsong, insect scratches, Pope Francis listening to the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. And so attentiveness is a kind of opening or receptivity that leads a person to set aside her own stories and listen instead to the stories, perhaps the unfamiliar stories told by others. And so it enters into other forms of relationship and participation that are other than our own. And that's the point, that by that attentiveness, we enter into a moral relationship with the natural world. We acknowledge, by paying attention, by holding it in our hands, by turning it this way and that, we acknowledge the value, what Leopold calls the moral considerability of the other, the hummingbird or the sleepy dug-up clam. They're worthy. They're astonishing. They're beyond us. And that glory is a kick in the pants. It says, hey, we're not the lords of the universe after all. We're not the apex of evolution. So, okay, then I think, well, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe natural history isn't applied attentiveness then, so much as natural history is applied wonder, or maybe it's both. And so somewhere I have this quote from Abraham Herschel. Wonder is a state of mind in which nothing is taken for granted. Each thing is a surprise. Being is unbelievable. We are amazed beyond words. Souls that do not falter at first sight, falling back on ready-made notions with which the memory is replete, can behold the mountains as if they were gestures of exaltation. To them, all sight is suddenness. So maybe the most important contribution of natural history is to remind us of this joyous, love-laden way of seeing that we have almost forgotten. And so it invites us to wonder and gratitude. So hooray for you folks up there in Prescott and up at the Cascades Institute.
I love natural history. The practice of natural history is applied wonder. I'm actually, Tom's on this call right now. Hey, Tom, can we change the definition? No, I want to figure out a way to incorporate that into our taglines or something. It's beautiful. And it connects with the idea that I find that as a scientist who's done a lot of environmental education and a lot of teaching, science can be off-putting and scary to people, but natural history, just knowing that anybody can find wonder, anybody can look closely at a plant or like catch a frog, that is open to all. It feels less gated, I guess. Yeah.
It's an invitation.
Yeah, to practice with us.
Yeah.
So thank you. So my final question for you is kind of like a big one again. But so everything feels dark and scary, especially, folks my age. I mean, to everyone, but folks my age, a lot of my friends having kids, just like things feel dark and scary. How do we remain strong in the face of all of this terrible, heartbreaking news about the world? How do we not tip over that knife edge into despair? How do we keep fighting? That's a big one.
Yeah. We always end our conversations with hope. It just seems to be what we have to do. And I think that's right. But I also think we need to rethink hope. I think we've made some mistakes about it. But I do love what Barbara Kingsolver says. If you run out of hope at the end of the day, get up in the morning and put it on with your shoes. The implication being that hope is a choice. And if it's made often enough, then hope becomes a character trait. And I also like Rebecca Solnit, who says, hope is not, I do not have this on a slip of paper in front of me. Hope is not what you sit on the sofa and clutch. Hope is the red axe that you seize in an emergency to break down the door. So hope becomes something powerful and very strong. And let's see, how much time do we have? Okay, I just want to make a very quick notion that I am more optimistic now than I have been for a long time. Because and that's very different from hope, because it's evidence-based. But most of the declarations that people have made to us about doom are what logicians call conditional sentences. They are if-then sentences. They are sentences like, unless this happens, then, or, and if we don't, then this, or if this continues, and so forth. But those initial conditions are not being met. And people are taking steps. People are doing what's necessary, and they're doing it faster than we had ever thought. Of course, change is occurring faster too. So we all have mixed feelings about hope. Let me close then with an abbreviated version of this essay about hope. It's called "Hope is the Other Thing with Feathers." And then I'll stop talking and we can move on to questions, okay?
Great. Yeah.
Good. Hope is the other thing with feathers. A long time ago, in a small house in Amherst, a young woman named Emily Dickinson sat at a table beside an open window. As filmy curtains blew over her page, she wrote her famous poem about hope. You know it. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. Long after that, artist illustrated her poem with a bird that always seems to be a perky little thing, sort of a cross between a bluebird and a wren, with its flirty tail and open beak, a juvenile to judge from its big head. I protest on Emily's behalf. That is the wrong bird. This was 1861. White supremacists were gathering in armies and marching north. Loggers were advancing through the continent's virgin forests. Black slaves, having fled rape and lynching, hid in her neighbors' barns. Malaria, typhoid, and cholera ripped through families. If hope was perching in her soul, it was something far fiercer than a bluebird. I'm going to suggest a bald eagle with its hooked beak and terrifying claws. An eagle, like the one I once saw come swooping over the inlet, swing out its awful yellow talons and grab a pink salmon off the water. The eagle flapped to rise with her prize, but her wings caught in the waves and she fell back. The eagle and the salmon raised a murderous ruckus of light and sea, then resigned. The eagle settled on the water and began to swim her prey toward shore. The nearest rocky point was a half-mile away and the tide was running hard. But the eagle judged her trajectory, hunched her elbows into scoops, pulled them through the water, and in this way paddled toward shore, dragging the struggling fish. A fog bank blew in and blew out again. To the east, a cloud layer obscured the sun until up it rose, gilding the water. Through it all, the fog and the gold, the eagle paddled on. Finally, she reached the broken rocks and clawed onto shore, exhausted and bedraggled, dragging up the salmon, still flapping. This is what hope is in hard times, not a sweetly singing wren anticipating good fortune, or a gull passively waiting for someone to bring him what he hopes for and abdicating any responsibility to feed himself. Hope in hard times is ferocious. It is strong and razor sharp. It is wild. It is stubborn. It is driven. It may choose its time, but it seizes its chance with open talons and drags it to shore, no matter how long that takes. Hope uses all its strength and wile and never gives up, knowing that if it stops trying, it will drown. Hope is not a bluebird. It's not a bluebird that sits on Emily's shoulder, tweeting comforting songs into her ear. It's an eagle that pins her soul in its protective grasp. The eagle calls a screeching call that sounds like rocks scraping against a muddy hull. Emily is right. There are no words to this song. Hope is an animal cry of rage and will. So call in all the feathered things that are perched somewhere in your weary soul, the harpy eagles and the sharp-shinned hawk. Call in the cassowaries and the shrikes. What we need is strength, strength in numbers and strength in moral conviction. What we need is shrieking, roaring courage.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Let's turn now in the last few minutes to the Q&A. So, okay, Tom has a comment that says, quote, "My work is to open people's hearts without breaking them." He says it's a superb description of the real work called for by our world in this time. Thanks, Tom. Elise once says, "Thank you for your words and ideas tonight. Anticipatory grief about nature is related to the idea of solastalgia for me. Years ago, when I first discovered the term, I felt very much alone in it. But now, 15 years on, I know that there are kindred spirits of people who recognize the dire straits we are in and are working at all levels to protect nature. Where, in place or organizations or governments, do you feel the greatest efforts toward restoration are happening?"
Solastalgia is a word that I have resisted. Because no one knows what it means and because it is so Latinate. It is a word, I think, more of the mind than of the heart. But the longing in the concept, I think, and the efforts at trying to make a difference are very much worth paying attention to. Where do I see restoration happening? I see it happening in my backyard, where we tore out the lawn and put in a forest that's 20 by 30 feet in the middle of a city, but it's a forest. I see it happening in land conservation organizations all around the country, where they are bringing land back into public ownership and back into a kind of health, where they're releasing the forces of nature. It's just hubris to think that we can restore nature. But we can get out of the way and we can jumpstart the process, and then nature can take it on its own. I see efforts of restoration in indigenous, in the increasingly strong voices of indigenous people, restoring their languages, restoring their relationship to the land, and offering advice to the whole world about the best way to get back again into right relationship with the world. So there's a kind of a restoration of the soul that I think is very, very much worth paying attention to. I see efforts of people who have been treated unjustly for generations, brutally unjustly for generations, carrying on the effort to bear witness and to tell those stories. And I think that is leading towards a kind of restoration too. The forces of restoration are being unleashed all across the land, both in the natural world and I think in the world of justice and love. I like the question. It gives me pleasure to think about thousands and thousands of people all around the world involved in that kind of work.
Yeah, thanks, Elise. I think we have time for one more question. We've got a great one from Ruben Ellis here. He says, "Thank you so much for this conversation. He so much appreciates your discussion of gratitude, which he says, I consider the most complex and interesting of all emotions. My question is this: where in this conversation of gratitude is the place for people who have been historically disenfranchised and continue to be disenfranchised by society for understanding and benefiting from the experience of gratitude for the natural world, when they have far less reason to feel grateful for what society has provided than those with more privilege?"
Well said, Ruben. I mean, say it again and say it loud. The point you're making is a point that we need to make again and again and again. And thank you for bringing it up. You know, Seneca, the great Seneca, said that gratitude is the root of all virtues. That is from gratitude that other things flow, like justice, like courage, like the other virtues. That without gratitude, we wouldn't be able to summon these other kind of virtues. So but I don't think that gratitude is the only source of the virtues. I think he's wrong about that. And that if a person who has historically been robbed and mistreated and unjustly so, can't summon gratitude, I have no problem with summoning anger. I've written an essay in this Take Heart book that's called In Defense of Outrage. I think there's much to be said for bearing witness to wrongs. I think that if we don't have the capacity to summon outrage, then we're leaving justice undefended. So it may be that outrage would be an alternative source for the kind of courage and joyful action that's needed. And we might turn to love. I don't want to be Pollyannish about this, but it's a powerful force. And I think it's the root of forgiveness. And no one has the right to ask for forgiveness. If they did ask for it, it wouldn't be forgiveness at all. But many people have the right to forgive. I'm not saying it's the time. I'm not saying that it's an obligation, but it's out there. So I don't know you, Ruben, but I would like to. And I'd like to carry on a conversation about what you're talking about, because there's a lot of redoing, there's a lot of undoing to hope for.
Wonderful. Well, it is. Oh, wait, one more popped in. Let me see if we can slide in. Oh, he said he would enjoy that too. Ruben's actually one of our board members for the Natural History Institute, so I can connect you to if you want. So with that, I think we're at time. So thank you all so much for attending tonight. Thank you to Kathleen for coming and sharing your words and your time with us. As I mentioned at the beginning, the edited version of this YouTube video is available right now on NHI's YouTube and in edited form tomorrow when I get a chance to trim off the beginning. So with that, thank you all so much for being here. And everyone's giving you gratitude in the Q&A. They're saying thank you. Thank you all for being here. And thank you, Kathleen. So
thanks, Jessie. It's been fun.